الكلمة الآن للأستاذ جيفري أبرسون نائب رئيس المركز الوطني لمحاكم الولايات بواشنطن. فليتفضل مسيو جيفري أبرسون.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's good to be back in Morocco again. I've been here many times over the past 2 years watching the historic transition in Morocco under the new constitution. I wanted to say thanks to His Majesty, the King Mohammed, and his advisors, the President of the Council, Mr. Faris, the Minister of Justice, Prosecutor General, and also so many distinguished people here representing countries that are addressing challenges in their justice systems that are so important to our citizens. Morocco, I'm told, was the first to recognize the United States as a new sovereign nation. And on behalf of the United States, I wanted to say thank you, Morocco, for giving us the first indication of our independence. I also wanted to dedicate this speech as I travel the world in my position as Vice President of the National Center for State Courts. I've been to probably 100 countries in the last 8 years working with the judiciaries. There are many that have suffered for the independence of justice, for the administration of justice, whether they be police, whether they be judges or prosecutors. But they've given their lives doing their duty for justice, so I dedicate this to them. Also, my congratulations to Morocco and its citizens and its hardworking government employees. The Constitution of 2011 is a beacon, I believe, for the global efforts to achieve a more perfect solution to the administration of justice. Indeed, in my opinion, it reaffirms Martin Luther King's view, among others, that the arc of the moral universe bends towards justice. It reminds me when I look back on why we in the United States declared our independence in 1776. When I reread our declaration stating that we hold these truths to be self-evident, that we are all created equal, that declaration was a cry for justice. And in the first line of our Constitution of 1789, it states that we want to form a more perfect union and to establish justice, the first of many principles in our Constitution. Judicial independence in our country, however, was not an absolute separation from the other branches of government, as indicated by many of our distinguished speakers. As for centuries, philosophers like Cicero, Polybius, and historians like Montesquieu have been capturing debates over time about separation within the concept of mixed constitutionalism. And whatever authority, civil or common law that we work under, I think the theory of mixed constitutionalism still applies. How do we balance the executive, the judicial, and the legislative? In fact, when I was in Ankara, Turkey recently, I was struck when I visited the tomb of Ataturk, who was also reading these same philosophers. And I know that because next to his resting place in his tomb is Montesquieu's Spirits of Laws. And among other books, it was opened to the section on the independence of the judiciary. And in his own handwriting, he underlined the independence of the judiciary. It should be noted that while in my country, James Madison was the father of our Constitution, John Adams was a very historical figure in the United States. And he was really the father of the third branch of government in the United States when he wrote parts of the Constitution of Massachusetts of 1780. And he said, "The dignity and stability of government in all its branches, the morals of the people, and every blessing of society depends so much upon an upright and skillful administration of justice, that the judicial power ought to be distinct, but both the legislative and executive, and independent upon both. That so it may be a check upon both and should be checks upon that." Now, I also know that, as Judge Stern said, in my work, not only in administering courts in the United States, but also administering international tribunals in The Hague, that our principles, while they may be separate at times, eventually are becoming one, because I think our values are truly, essentially universal. As an extension of that comment, I would like to add, based on my experience in administering war crimes cases, that a main reason for judicial independence is to protect the rights of the minorities. Indeed, I believe that when judges protect the rights of minorities and our vulnerable citizens, they are protecting the majority from itself. The strengthening of the independence of the judiciary has been evolving as a theme worldwide, especially over the last 5 years. Transfers of administrative capacity to judicial councils to increase judicial independence, not only in Morocco, but have been recently enacted in South Africa, Kenya, Brazil, Mongolia, and Trinidad, among others. And other countries are focused on the continuing development of institutional capacity. The creation of judicial councils, according to a recent publication by the University of Chicago, is in accordance with a historic trend, as over 60% of the world's countries now have some form of a judicial council, up from 10% only 30 years ago. With all the progress, the big challenge appears to be, how do we keep the independence of the judiciary once achieved constitutionally? That is the challenge, is to make it work. To discuss the importance of independence, we must also include in this abstract principles matters of dependence, as independence of a judge is also based on the judges performing their duty, not just as judges, but as citizens. This raises the larger issue. While judicial independence is widely studied, accountability has been the subject of much less inquiry. It requires that the judiciary maintain some level of responsiveness to society, as well as a high level of professionalism. In conclusion, I learned at an early age in a small town in Ohio in the United States that there was a provision called, "We must seek the truth, and the truth shall make us free." And I think justice is largely based on truth. Ultimately, the goal of an independent judiciary should be to seek the truth, as when a citizen files a case asking for a judgment based on the truth of the facts, and that we make a swift decision finding truth when a public proclamation and reaffirmation to all that we are doing our jobs. But I am concerned as I travel, and I'm not specifically addressing any one particular country. I respect all the countries that have made statements up to this point in administering justice. I am concerned about two things related to the truth. in my opinion, there is a question as to whether the formal system of justice is fading. Hearings and trials cost too much and take too long. Informal solutions based on compromise and the international evolution of international jurisdictions are taking their place when disputes are now when they're not formally resolved, are being informally resolved behind closed doors without the administration of oaths to tell the truth or the supervision of a judge. And under that system, as it evolves, we must ask the question, where is transparency? Indeed, it may be that the judge's role in many countries is becoming more about process and less about trials. The other issue that I'm concerned about is delay. I believe that delays in administering cases and the slowness of that administration results in the decay of truth, finding truth in our system. If an independent justice system finds truth, and truth is the basis for freedom, are we concerned enough about these challenges? Next week, I will be meeting in Vienna, Austria, and the United Nations Office of Drugs and Crimes, which was the supporting agency for the Bangalore Principles that were adopted in 2002, will be meeting. And in the context of that meeting, I have asked that we consider revisiting the Bangalore Principles, to consider whether or not we need to adjust the principles to the role of the judge as they are newly being developed, and whether we need an added emphasis on accountability of the judge vis-a-vis the emphasis on independence. So next week we will be voting in Vienna as to whether to reform a committee to meet in The Hague to revisit the principles. And I've been listening to the comments of all the leaders in attendance today, and many of the comments, I think, frame many of the considerations that will be made in Geneva next week. I also wanted to say that last November, there was established a new International Institute for Justice Excellence in The Hague. I think we all know that we are more dependent now than ever on technology and enhancing productive administrative mechanisms that will facilitate the strategic planning mechanisms of the court. I believe that as we improve in the creation and the establishment of judicial councils and administrative authority within the courts, we must remember that we must capture the new technologies, but that requires a much higher level of technical expertise within the operation of the courts. I think that's a real challenge for us going forward. In fact, I see productivity as an answer to some of the solutions that we face in the area of delay and time management. And with that, I wanted to say thank you, Morocco. You have a great country, and it's good to be back again. Thank you so much.
شكرا أستاذ جيفري على هذا العرض القيم.